Hello, I'm David Mandy, representing the pro bono arm of O&M Partners in New York. I was too young to fight in the Vietnam War, but it had a huge impact on my childhood. Many of the older brothers of my friends didn't make it back, and I witnessed the suffering and often the neglect of those who did. Just thinking about veterans opens my heart. As a writer, I had the insight that Dr. Ken Atchity's thinking might help veterans reinvent themselves coming home. And we're not talking about just resumes. As my friend, Lieutenant Colonel retired Nicole Drury points out, coming home from the military is a story full of intensity and not always a match with the more superficial commercial world. It's a story that often gets out of control and winds up controlling you adversely. There's a sea of voices in all our heads vying for control. Our inner stories are competing. And because the strongest thoughts tend to win, you want to make sure your story actually serves you. Ken Atchity believes that the universe is made up of stories. Today, Ken is focused on helping you come up with stories that serve as roadmaps to inner peace and personal fulfillment. This is not a medical model. Ken is not focused on pathology or the interpretation of your behavior. It's a positive and creative approach to helping you live the story that you want to tell, rather than living a self-rejecting story, which we're all already experts at. Before I turn to the broadcast over to Dr. Atchity, I need to recognize the support of Richard Drago, Commander of Chapter 1782, Military Order of the Purple Heart, which is made up of wounded combat veterans all over the United States and its extended territories. This call would not have happened without the support of Commander Drago, and I want to thank him from the get-go. So on this note, I'm going to turn the call over to Ken Atchity.
Thanks, David. I appreciate the intro. And how's everybody today? I hope you're staying relatively safe. I'm thrilled to be here. And David's right. The universe is made of stories. At least our human universe is made of stories more than it is of atoms. From the first time a caveman came back to the cave without dragging a gazelle behind him, everybody wanted to know, what's your story? That's kind of how humans would greet people from another planet. What's your story? We sent Pioneer out into space with runes, codes showing what our story is for other civilizations, because we know that's what they'd want to know. What's your story? But when you think about it, we are absolutely inundated and surrounded and saturated with stories all the time. We're always evaluating our lives with what's your story. And during your service years, you basically were working for a bigger story than yourself. You didn't even have to believe in the story. You were still doing your service to the country. And now you are in a situation where before, one of the things you sacrificed was your story. Now you're coming back into a world where you need to take charge of your story and recapture your own story, or find it if you've never found it before. And that's what I like to help people with, because I believe that beneath every situation, there is a story waiting to come out and to clarify. You should find the line you want to be in. And if you can't find it, then you have to discover it. You have to create that line for yourself. And that's what I think the most exciting challenge about re-entering is. And let's make sure that you are in charge of that, not just having something happen to you. Some of the challenges that you will discover when you try to break back into civilian life are challenges that are met by other people. And one of the things you're going to deal with from the very beginning is the equation, or the question of money versus satisfaction. Money is not everything. So really what life is all about, I find, is purpose. It's finding something to do that satisfies you. So the first thing that you need to know is to take a close look at the resources around you. And so it starts with identifying the resources around you. Those are resources within you, but you also want to identify other resources, that you have connections. Make a list of these things so we start knowing exactly where we are, as general would survey a battlefield and figure it all out before coming up with a plan of action. The next step, obviously, is making a plan. And along the way, it helps to keep your sense of humor. Keep your sense of humor. When things are bad, take them hour at a time. Focus on the actual now. The struggle is the great thing about it. It's actually an exploration in which you're the hero going forward. And you're the one who's going to figure out what your story is and make it happen. The little bit of hope a soldier can make a long day work. So use the discipline that you learned in the service to resist your need for short-term gratification. One more piece of advice is don't ask for help when you can ask for advice. Fall as many times as you can, because you can always pick yourself up. That's kind of what I wanted to say, except to encourage you, never give up, never give up, never give up. And if you get discouraged, think of some of the things that we talked about. And, you know, David, I would love to answer questions.
A question for Ken.
Actually, yes, Ken. So in both the literary and the film worlds, there tends to be a lot of waiting for information that may or may not ever come, and a lot of times requesting it's discouraged. That classic "Don't call us, we'll call you." Now, getting or requesting feedback or updates, while not always timely when you're in the military, it's encouraged. So going from that kind of world to complete silence is very unsettling. So what advice do you have for dealing with that kind of long stretch of not knowing where you stand?
We're going to turn now to Lieutenant Colonel retired Nicole Drury, who's been very helpful on this call. Nicole?
Hey, David. Ken, can you hear me?
Nicole.
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Great. Ken, one of the things that you mentioned in the opening part of your talk was that you often put your own plan on the back burner because of the military's plan. You kind of submit yourself to following the military's plan. So when you leave the military, how do you find your own sense of identity or your purpose after that, especially if you've served a whole career, maybe 20 or 30 years in the military? Oh, that was an excellent answer. I was just taking a bunch of notes here as you were talking. One of the things that you also talked about earlier was in a job interview or when you're transitioning into a new location with neighbors or colleagues, how to tell your story that would make you relatable. And I liked your advice of, keep it short. Nobody wants to hear your whole story. And find a nugget that would connect you to people. Do you have anything else? Any other advice?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Two things I was going to say. I was going to respond to what you were saying earlier about going back to that post office job or whatever that represents as the thing that you might want to depart from to some kind of work of passion. And I often tell my students who bring up this idea of always having a parachute or a fallback position. And I figure if you're going to jump out of the plane and you got a parachute, you're probably going to pull the ripcord. If you don't have the parachute, you're going to learn how to fly in a hurry, or you're going to hit the rocky cliffs below. So I think that making that personal commitment to yourself and to your dream is important, and not quitting never guarantees success, but quitting always ensures failure. So I've just, I'm not the smartest guy you'll ever come across, but I was dumb enough to not have a parachute. and consequently, I've had a long career. And I wanted to just talk for a second about what you led with, Ken, this idea about your own story and how that may or may not serve you. And so my question for you is how do you confront your own story, identify it, and then determine whether it's serving you, and if not, how do you coordinate that so that it can serve you?
At the end of the day, helping each other is what makes us different from other species. So to be the most human and the best of humanity, we need to continue that in every way. So the idea of paying it forward. You're grateful for what you got that was positive out of the service. Now pay it forward by bringing those principles to the help of others making the transition. Basically say to yourself, anybody who's trying to find their right livelihood should be willing to have many false starts, to fail over and over again, because the only way that you will ever truly fail is not to continue trying. And wish everybody the best of luck, and wish we could continue the dialogue. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for our panelists for the great questions, and I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you. I want to just thank everyone for all your participation. Without it, we couldn't have had the interaction we had, and I really feel like we've answered, Ken's helped answer a lot of questions. So I want to wish everyone a pleasant evening, and again, thank you for your participation.